Let's slow down. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Synergetic Games. My name is Natalie, and today we are going to be reading. We're going to be reading, which is the opposite of playing anything. Um, we're going to be reading The Kingdom by the Sea by Robert Westall. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that this channel does something called community storytime, and what used to happen was we had a community channel points reward where you would redeem some points and we'd read a couple pages of the story. This one right here, for those of you who are curious, as we went through the stream. But I've decided that I kind of prefer to have it with a sort of dedicated stream, so that's what this is about. So we got rid of the reward. Thank you so much for the hype. So yeah, we got rid of the reward. Now we're just doing storytime streams, which will probably vary in length depending on how much I want to read. Thank you. So that's where we're at with this. I'm gonna hopefully continue this with other books in the future. I don't think we'll end up bringing back the storytime reward, because my main issue was that when we did that, it felt like it would often, just crop up in the most inconvenient times, and it would take ages to find a good moment to redeem the storytime thing. So we're just gonna do it here, and you guys can just chill out for a little bit. Like I say, there's no definite length of the stream, because obviously it really depends on how tired I am and how tiring it gets to read out loud. So again, it's gonna vary. I put the start time on the schedule as like 10 o'clock, but I decided to do it at a little bit earlier because I had the time essentially this evening. So it may happen earlier, or it may happen at 10. It really depends. I was just looking at your Dean's story party kill. If only we could do that. Boris Johnson has been all over the news today because there's a bunch of protesters mocking him outside number 10, just with Boris masks on, dancing around and drinking booze. So that's what's been happening, today. That's the most interesting news that we've had for a while. The rest of it is, of course, naturally still COVID, and also questions of when will Boris resign, which will probably be never, because we'd have to pry power out of his cold, dead hands before we saw any improvement or anything like that. Not to be morbid, but that's politics for you. Okay, so we've more or less. I hope he doesn't resign. I hope he gets kicked. We have to cancel Boris Johnson. Can we just collectively decide as a nation not to listen to him? This includes politicians. Can we just elect somebody new in the meantime? Just in cabinet, just go, actually, why don't we just put Bob in charge and then slowly push Boris Johnson out? Just like the kid in the playground nobody likes. Oh God, I'd love to have a politician in power that I'm not going to say is not immediately disliked, because you're always going to get people who don't like somebody, but somebody who's just not immediately sketchy the whole time. But that's been every prime minister we've had since I don't know, Tony Blair has been start to finish sketch. So Sketchy and self-serving. That's the, okay, right. Speaking of things that are sketchy, we're about 38 pages in, according to this, apparently. But there's only like 200 more pages to go, and I feel like 38 pages is too many pages to go back to the beginning and start again, so I refuse. Yes, this is the wrong story time. So yes, I refuse. We're going to continue on from where we left off in the other streams. For anyone who's curious about what happens at the beginning, I'm sorry, but you'll have to scroll through all of my other streams to find the rest of the pages. Good luck. Or you could just grab the book yourself if this sounds interesting. Okay, anyway, let us begin. The dog thought that was great. It began pouncing on all the patches of seaweed, killing them with its feet, dive-bombing them, and then throwing them high in the air. He tried calling it to heel, as he had seen the man do when they were walking their dog. As he had seen men do when they were walking their dogs on the beach. It ignored him. He made up his mind to work on it. Its disobedience could get them both in trouble. It was then that he found the lump of soaking rope. He tried it for strength, stamped on one end, and pulled the other end with both hands. It seemed pretty strong, and it was 1 yard long with frayed ends. He knew there was no point in calling the dog, but he waved the rope enticingly, and the dog came. And he grabbed its collar and slipped the rope through. The dog promptly took off along the beach, dragging him after it. It was stronger than he was, and heavier. All he could do was hang on. The dog made terrible noises, like it was choking itself to death, but he hung on. He had to win, for both their sakes. It was a good dog, but only young. It had to learn. Finally, it got tired of strangling itself and walked quietly by his side. It was then he found the other useful thing. A washing day ladle, like Mam used. About 8 inches across, rusty, but it had no holes in it. It would do to give the dog water in. He came back to the boat full of triumph and got dressed. As he did, 2 more pennies fell out of his trouser pocket. He searched every pocket after that, and ended up with 3p halfpenny. 3p halfpenny, sorry. He stared at it, lying in the pale palm of his hand, and despair fell on him without warning, out of a clear blue sky like a collapsing house. What good was 3p halfpenny? It wouldn't even buy him a meal to share tonight. Only chips. And then the chips were gone. What then? And when the chips were gone, what then? And the next day and the next, getting hungrier and hungrier. He could only get food by going to Cousin Elsie's. And he knew what Uncle George would do with the dog. Straight down to the police station. He stared at the sand for a long, long time. The dog, puzzled, impatient, leapt up and put its paws on his shoulders and looked at him trustingly. He could have died of agony. And then he remembered his father's voice again. Don't flap around like a wet hen. Think. And immediately he realized he did have some money in the Treasury Savings Bank. £17, 10 shillings. All the money from all the birthdays and Christmases that Mam had made him save when he wanted to go out and spend it. Saving up for a rainy day, she called it, when he raged and pleaded with her. But where was the bank book? In the attaché case, of course. He dived in under the boat and clicked open the case with trembling hands. There was a bundle of bank books, held together neatly with an elastic band. Dad's on top, then Mam's, then his. He opened it. It said in neat curling writing, £17, 10 shillings. And he knew how to get it out. You only had to fill in a form, that was all. He had enough to keep himself and the dog for months. Wild excitement blew through him like a gale. He must get it, now. Then his eyes drifted around to the rest of the case. Over the other precious things it contained. Dad's best wristwatch. The one he only used for special occasions, in case it got scratched. The bright pink insurance books. A wedding photograph in a small silver frame, with Mum and Dad looking smooth, smiling and young. His own photograph in school uniform, from when he first went to the grammar school, a neat bundle of school reports. How proud of him they'd been. Tears pricked again, so he rushed on, being practical. The family rations book, a bar of Mum's Pongy special toilet soap, still in its paper wrapper. The scent wafted it to his nostrils, and he felt suddenly terribly guilty, as if he were burgling a church. He was never allowed to look inside the attaché case. It was private to Mum and Dad. He took his own bank book and then slammed the case shut and clicked the fasteners loudly. Then, as long as he carried the attaché case, Mum and Dad would still be with him, like the Ark of the Covenant that the children of Israel carried all the way to the Promised Land. To soothe himself, he carefully folded the blankets into a neat heap, then came out of the boat and smoothed down the sand to hide the entrance, and sat playing with the dog's ears till his breathing came back to normal. The Ark of the Covenant. I don't think it was a literal ark. Not a moment too soon. There was a man coming out of the Coast Guard cottage, the one with the smoking chimney, walking down the beach towards him. Harry could tell by the way he walked that he wasn't a bad bloke. He walked slow and steady and contented, puffing on his pipe, stopping to look at things and touch them. Only a bit bossy, perhaps, as if it was his place. "Good morning, young feller, my lad." "You're the early bird that catches the worm." "Been swimming," said Harry. "So I noticed while I was shaving. Said to the missus there was a young feller me lad having a grand time with his dog on a Saturday morning." "Early grand dog," he said, bent and patted it. "What's his name?" "Don." The man looked for a moment for a name medal on the collar, but didn't find any. "Dog could do with a combing. Sand won't do his coat no good." "I always comb him when I get home." Harry was amazed how neatly the lie popped out. Then he said, "What time is it, mister?" 8:30, said the man, pulling out a pocket watch. Better be on me way up yonder." He pointed to the Coast Guard station on the cliff. "Just thought I'd have a word with you, seeing as you're having so much fun with your dog. Only," he added, "you could do it with a pair of bathing trunks instead of bathing in your underpants. You'll have young girls down here later on." He glanced around. A towel wouldn't do any harm either. Harry glanced at him, suddenly hunched up wary. But the man gave him a conspiratorial grin. Is that a typo? I think I found a typo. It says grim, as in G-R-I-M, and I think he meant grin like G-R-I-N, which would make more sense. But it's always interesting when you find typos in books. I didn't tell my mom all I was doing when I was young either. and he was gone, leaving only a fragrant whiff of his tobacco smoke. The sentence was, but the man gave him a conspiratorial grim. So that's why I think it's grin instead of grim. It happens to everyone. Do you know, I was reading a book the other day, which I might read you. It's like 60 pages long. I could probably do it. Maybe not in a day, maybe in a couple of sessions, but like it's 60 pages long. It cost my mom way too much money for what it was. She bought it for me for a birthday present. And I think she spent a $5 on it. So like 60 pages for a $5 is unbelievable. Actually, probably closer to £6, but it's worth reading. It's about a bunch of people getting lost in space and running out of food. So, you know, that's the main point of contention there. But yeah, it is worth reading. I definitely will probably read it to you after this one. It's very short, but cost my mom way too much money for 60 pages. Anyway, chapter 4. 3 hours later, Harry lay back on the sand by the boat, closed his eyes and let his mind stop whirling. What a terrible trip. He was never going up into the town again. Tommy Dodds had seen him, and Audrey Henry's mother. And he'd only missed running into Cousin Elsie by diving up a back alley like a shot rabbit. He still wasn't sure she hadn't seen him. And the terrible wait on the bank while the man counted out his money 3 times before he gave it to him. And he was worried about Don tied to a lamppost outside. When he got out, he took a bus straight back to Teignmouth. Thank God he'd had that 3 and halfpenny, or he'd have had to give the conductor a 10-shilling note for the fare. And the conductor had still fussed about how Sandy the dog was, and how it was making a mess of his bus. It had been stupid to go up into town on a Saturday when everybody was out shopping. If he went on making stupid mistakes like that, he'd get caught for certain. But Teignmouth village had been better. Nobody knew him in Teignmouth. And he'd had a good shopping spree. 10-shilling notes, or no 10-shilling notes. There were still things to buy that were not on the rations. The pet shop women had been nice and friendly, sold him a leash for the dog, and a steel curry comb, and a big bag of dog biscuits. And some anti-flea soap. That would do for them both. She had pursed her lips over the note, but he'd said, "It's me birthday present." And she had told him he was a kind boy, spending all his birthday present on his dog. Then he'd gone to the butcher's and got some bones for the dog, and looked at the Cornish pasties so hungrily that the man said with a grin, "Do you want one? You can't live on doggy bones, a growing lad like you." And lastly, he'd gone to the newsagents and bought 2 boxes of matches, because he thought they were sure to come in useful. And the biggest newspaper he could see. Not that he cared a damn about the news, but certain movements in his tummy told him he was going to need a newspaper tonight after dark. God, life was all food. What? God, life was all food, going in one end and out the other. Right. That sentence I should have just finished reading. But for the moment he was content, full of Cornish pasty, watching the dog chew at his big bone, and watching the girls go past in their bathing costumes. Through a pair of dark glasses thought on to buy at the chemist. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I wanted to sneeze, but the sneeze didn't come. So that was awkward. The chip shop man saw him coming, long before he got to the shop. Harry could see the bald head peering and bobbing maliciously above the heads of the customers. He had spent half the day manufacturing lies for the chip shop man. He tied up Don properly by his leash to the lamppost and pushed boldly into the shop. "Ha!" the man said nastily. "Here's our little war hero, back for his nightly share of our fish and chips. I see you've managed to wash your face for once." Harry joined the queue quietly, saying nothing. All the people in the shop were total strangers, so he knew he couldn't look for any help there. "He's bombed out, you know," said the man nastily. "Where are you billeted then?" Harry was ready. "Priory Road." It was the longest road in Timoth, and not very posh. "What number?" asked the man. Harry was ready for that too. "Dunno," he said. "But it's halfway down on the right-hand side. Got a green door and big white seashells in the garden." Half the houses in Priory Road had big white seashells in the garden. "What's the lady's name that you're billeted on?" "It's a funny long name. We just have to call her Auntie." There was a titter in the queue. Harry felt they were turning onto his side. The woman at the front of the queue said sharply, "Come on, Jim. I haven't got all night to stand here. You know. Our Ted's got to go back from leave." The man gave Harry another nasty glare, but started shoveling chips again. Meanwhile, the other women in the queue began discussing which woman with the funny long name had a house in Priory Road, with a green door and seashells in the front of the garden. "It's not Peggy Molyneux, is it? I hadn't heard she'd anybody billeted on her." Harry was glad he'd picked the longest road in Timoth, but he knew with dreadful certainty that this was the last time he could use the chip shop. The gossip would be all over the village by tomorrow night, and what would he and Don do for food then? The woman asked him more questions about his landlady, and he almost ran out of answers and sweated. But at last it was his turn. "6 sausage and chips, please." He might as well grab what food he could. "6?" yelled the man. "Are you feeding a bloody regiment or something?" "The landlady wants some and all. And for her husband." Harry's lips quivered. He felt a traitorous tear gathering in his eye and simply let himself cry. It had worked last night. "Leave the poor bairn alone, for God's sake," said the woman. "What's he ever done to you, Jim?" And there was a murmur from the queue. Harry didn't think anybody liked the man, really. But it was a marvellous relief to get out into the cool air of Front Street, with a packet burning against his chest. His tears dried up instantly, and he untied Don and walked down to the seat, amazed at himself. His dad had always taught him never to lie, and only babies cried. But tears and lies seemed to be all that worked now. Not being able to sneeze is so uncomfortable. In the night, the dog stirred against his side, stirred and growled deep in its throat. Harry was awake in a flash. Was there someone prowling in the dark beach? Somebody after Mam's precious attaché case. He listened hard and heard nothing. Then the dog growled again. And Harry heard. Rumma, rumma, rumma. Out over the sea, the Jerry bombers were back, and there seemed to be a lot of them. Then, on the castle cliffs overhead, the siren went. The dog whimpered once, and then went mad, trying to scrabble its way out from under the boat, casting huge sheets of sand over the blankets and into Harry's eyes in the dark. His eyes were agony. Tears and Lies is going to be the name of my first album. Sounds legit. I'd listen to it. Agony. Here we are. Okay. But he knew he must stop the dog. Dogs went crazy in air raids. Ran about the streets howling, upsetting people. Ran blind, ran anywhere. Don could run off and get lost forever. He grabbed for Don's collar and felt around desperately for the leash, and got it on him, just as the dog wriggled out from underneath the boat. Harry let himself be dragged after him, bumping his head so he saw stars. There was nothing else he could do. Outside it was light as day. 3 searchlights, 3 great bars of blue light reached outwards from the castle into the sky above the sea, slowly waving and feeling like fingers for the approaching Jerrys. More searchlights waved around the south shields across the river. Little bits of mist or cloud drifted through the beams like cigarette smoke. By their light, Harry could see every detail of the beach and be seen. There'd be a warden round in a minute, yelling at him to get under cover, and the bombers were closer. The guns would be opening fire overhead, where to run to. But the dog just ran, and Harry had to run with him, tripping over bits of wood half buried in the sand, and once falling flat and being dragged along. He hadn't a clue where he was going, but Don had. Suddenly they were up against the beginning of the pier, the massive granite pier. And set into the pier, huge arches, and inside the arches, massive granite blocks were stored for repairing the pier when the waves broke it. Don went straight into the dark gap between the blocks and dragged Harry after him, and then Don stopped. And Harry realized he was in the best air raid shelter in Timoth. 6 feet of granite over his head and solid granite on 3 sides. And on the 4th, a parapet of huge blocks just low enough to peer over. "Good dog," he whispered. "Good dog," and fondled the dog's ears. Don was shaking so hard he made Harry shake in sympathy. Harry remembered something his dad had said about dogs in air raids. They suffered terribly with their ears, because they could hear 10 times better than people. The sounds were 10 times as loud to him. He pulled off one of his jumpers and folded down the dog's ears and wrapped the jumper around them hard. The dog seemed to like it. It snuggled in. And then the castle guns fired, and it was like the end of the world. The world cracked apart 4 times. Harry's head seemed to crack apart 4 times. His ears hurt. Physically hurt, like earache. He remembered the government issuing earplugs. Everyone had laughed at the idea of a little bit of rubber earplugs. Everyone had laughed at the idea of the little rubber earplugs on their bit of string that you carried in your gas mask case. If you still carried your gas mask case, which hardly anyone ever did these days. Only kids with soppy mouths. He wished he had them now, but something. Hold the dog with one hand, scrabble in his pockets with the other. A bit of paper, bus ticket, He shoved it into his mouth and chewed frantically. When it was soggy enough, he worked it into 2 lumps and pushed 2 pieces into each of his ears. The castle guns fired again, but it was much better now. Only half as bad. Didn't hurt. He shoved the bits of bus ticket even further in, then peered with interest over his high bulwark. Bulwark? I have no idea how to pronounce that. He'd never been out in an air raid before. He'd always been cowering down in the shelter, like a rat in a hole. Mam hadn't even let him look out of the shelter door, unless it had been quiet for ages. He thought it was the grandest firework display he'd ever seen. High above, great chains of blue lights hung, lighting the whole sky. They swung. They drifted across each other like swathes of stars. These... Bulwark? Okay. Bulwark. Got it. I'll remember that. These must be the chandeliers Dad had talked about, dropped by the bombers to light their target. The ack of men at South Shields must be trying to shoot them out. Long streams of tracer shells, yellow and red, climbing slowly into the sky from behind South Shields Pier. They made the blue lights rock and swing harder. But they didn't put them out. Then the castle guns fired again, making Don flinch, making a pattern of 4 bright stars in the sky that burnt holes in your eyes, so that wherever you looked afterwards, there were 4 black dots in what you looked at. You know that thing where you see shapes behind your eyes? That's what's going on there. I'm gonna try and center myself here in the webcam. I'm just listing off to the sides slowly. And then he saw the German bomber, clear and sharp as a minnow in a pond, caught in a cone of no less than 5 searchlights. It wriggled and glistened like a minnow with a shiny nose and tiny crosses on its wings. A minnow trying to escape out of a giant hand, but the giant hand of light held it. Twist and turn though it might, then every gun in Tinside seemed to be firing at it. Again and again, it vanished in the scatters of blinding flashes. Harry's eyes seemed as full of black holes as Mam's colander. But then the flashes had gone. The tiny plane was still there, twisting and turning and getting bigger. It didn't seem to be going anywhere anymore, just wriggling. Hey, Laffy Taffy, how you been? It didn't seem to be going anywhere anymore, just wriggling, trying to escape. And then there was a streak of fire, then a comet, a shooting star of brilliant yellow headed out to sea, down to the sea, down and down and down, brighter and brighter and brighter. Better than a 2-shilling rocket. And then it burst into a brilliant shower of blue lights that were caught in the wind and drifted and drifted and went out. All but one that had glowed all the way down to the dark water. The guns were silent, so you heard the hiss it made as it hit the sea. Heard the people cheering all the way over the dark water in South Shields. He hugged the dog. We got one, boy. We got one. It was better than North Shields' football team scoring a goal. In the silence, the dog thumped its tail against his leg and licked his hand. And then the next wave of Jerry's came rooming in. We are currently reading about an air raid. This poor boy is homeless, living under a boat with a random dog he found on a beach. And then the dog freaked out and they ran under a pier, and that's where they've been for a while. Yes, it's very intense. I apologize for my reading. I'm reading so fast I'm just stumbling over all of my sentences. And, yeah. There's just been an air raid, and they've shot a plane out of the sky, and it's fallen in the sea, and everyone's quite happy about that. It was a German plane. In our defense, it was a German plane. Which was fine at the time. And now there's another wave of Jerrys. It was dawn before the Jerrys stopped coming, and the all clear went. He and the dog came out of their deep, deep shelter. The dog stretched fore and aft, sniffed an upturned boat, and peed against it. Harry, walking on what felt like two wooden legs, watched it with great fondness. Don was wonderful. He'd heard the bombers coming long before the sirens went. He'd found the best shelter. Above all, he'd been close to the dog, to its furry, warm bulk. The dog had been closer to him than Mom had ever been, let alone Dad. He thought he and the dog made a pretty good team. He sat on his upturned boat and watched the dog sniffing around the beach. Nice to sit in peace and quiet, listening to the little waves plopping on the sand after the great storm of the night. But today, Sunday, they had to move on before someone noticed them on the beach on Monday morning and caught him as a truant from school. Before the food ran out, before the dog went through again what he had gone through last night. Away, up the coast, to where there were no people to bother them, to where there was plenty of food. He knew he wasn't thinking very straight. He needed more sleep. He called to the dog, lured it to him with his share of cold sausage and chips, then got it through the hole under the boat, and in a little while they were both sound asleep. Does the dog have a name? The dog's name is Don. Like Donald, but just without the old. Don the dog, indeed. Just come out the bath, brain smush. Oh, I see. Yes, the dog's name is Don. I swear if the author kills him off. I hope not. He's like the only other main character so far. It would be heartbreaking if Dog died. Chapter 5. He started awake and pushed back the blankets. He was very hot, and there was a small of smeltering tar. A small of melting oh, I think it meant smell. And there was a smell of melting tar, and, worst of all, voices all around him. And the dog was gone. He must have slept too long. It was Sunday afternoon. On Sunday morning, the beach was empty except for a few men walking their dogs. Bad editor. That's 2 mistakes I found so far. 2! Anyway, where was I going? It was Sunday afternoon. On Sunday morning, the beach was empty except for a few men walking their dogs. But on Sunday afternoons, in summer, even in wartime, it filled up with families out for the day. People were sitting with their backs against his boat, blocking out the strip of sunshine until they went home. Until they went home, he was trapped, and they usually didn't go home till about 6 o'clock. And where was the dog? He could see the place where he had scrabbled out. How long had he been gone? Where had it gone? Had it gone for good? There was nothing he could do. He couldn't scramble out of it in full view of everybody. It wasn't that he was afraid of people sitting around. It was more a terrible embarrassment of making a fool of himself, of being stared at when he was all dirty and sweaty and peculiar looking. And his cousin Elsie, or somebody else he knew, might be sitting there. All he could do was push back the blankets and lie there, and munch another soggy mass of cold chips and worry about the dog. It was more horrible than being in the shelter during an air raid. It was the voices that soothed him in the end. The family sitting against the boat, at least, were strangers. A mum and dad, 3 kids, and a granny. They had rough accents. They must have come from further up the river, somewhere like Baker. This is why I don't judge private works and fan fiction too harshly. You'll find books at Barnes and Nobles that are just absolute garbage. You'd think the editor should be shot for allowing this disaster of work to be written and published. Then you find a masterpiece on whatever. Yeah, exactly. I've read completely amazing fan fiction that, like, oh my god, if it was original fiction, I would absolutely buy it. But then I've read some not so great things that have managed to be published professionally, and you're like, is this what we're reading? Is this what we're reading today? But yeah, this is the thing though about the creative arts and publishing, is that because there's so many people, and so many people have things that they want to say and write down, and yes, some of them will be good, some of them will be mediocre, and some of them will be absolutely amazing. But the thing is, because it's so subjective, you're gonna find you're gonna find a mixed bag of stuff, and you're gonna find a bunch of editors who if you find the right editor, you're bound to get published. So there could be anything out there, which, you know, in some ways is very encouraging, and I know in other ways you're a bit like, yeah. But it's very difficult to quality control creative things such as writing or art. I don't know why modern art's a thing. I hate it. And yet it exists and is popular. So, you know. That's subjective, and then there's just plain bad. As in grammatical mistakes, inconsistencies, plot holes, etc. Yes. Sometimes, particularly long-running stories, I think, like, unless it's just really poorly planned, the longer the story is, the more likely you're going to have plot holes. But if it's just a bad story, you're going to find plot holes left, right, and center, because logic only applies when it makes sense for the plot. But if it doesn't apply because of plot reasons, then it's a plot hole. He stood up and walked to the door. There was no one there. He rolled over and went back to sleep. What? Is that something you just read? Okay. It was the voices that soothed him in the end. The family sitting against the boat, at least, were strangers. A mum, a dad, three kids, and a granny. They had rough accents. They must come from further up the river, somewhere like Baker. When the granny said, "I've lived in Baker all me life, and I've never seen anything like that in all my born days," it cheered him slightly that he had guessed right. He sort of lost himself in the life of the family. Bossy mum, idle dad. "Why don't you play cricket with the Burns, George? They're bored stiff." Why, there's no room to play cricket, Annie. There's not room to swing a cat. Don Bradman himself couldn't play cricket here. It's because I'm silent doesn't mean I don't see your insults, buddy. It was a jab. Well, do something with them. Women, I slave 6 days a week at the Northeastern Marine, and even God rested on the 7th day. There's our Edith throwing sand in Sammy's eyes again. Stop it, our Edith, or you'll feel the back of my hand. Can't you get them an ice cream, George? I could do it with one myself. Ice cream. Hey, there's a war on. There's a fella at the top of the bank. Bloody Italian black marketeer. You don't know what they put in them things. Vaseline and hair cream in it. Anything else they can lay their hands on. Would poison a dog. Mom, tell our Edith to stop it. Our Edith! It was like going back into another life, and soon there was some good news. Mom, this dog's lost. It's starving, look. It's putting its paws up asking. It's begging. Get away. Alsatians can't beg. They're too big. It's hungry. Give it a piece of pie, Gran. Give it that piece of pie Gran dropped in the sand. Oh, here you are then. Anything for peace. Do you think that dog is lost, George? Harry tensed up with terror. No, it's not lost, Tinny. He's got a collar. It's just on the cage. It's just on the cage. I've watched it cadging off people for the last hour. It's doing all right. Whoever starves, it won't be that dog. Come here, boy, have a sandwich. Best spam. Get it away, I don't like Alsatians, they're savage. About as savage as a newborn lamb. Look, he's rolling over to have his tummy tickled. Is it? I didn't even know it was a word. I hope I said it right. Is it cadge? Yeah, catch. Okay, cool. Harry listened for a little while longer to the dog catching for food around the beach. It struck him that Don had more talents than he'd imagined. Don was indeed doing all right. Then he dozed off again. He could just sleep and sleep. He could just sleep and sleep these days. Must be the heat. I've never used the word cadge in my life. As I say, I didn't even know it was a word. He was wakened by the dog's wet nose, nudging him forcefully in the neck. He came to with a start, worrying about the people, but there was silence outside. Then he peered out. The beach was empty. It was later than he wanted it to be. The sun was already dropping towards the cliff top. Night was coming, and with the night, the bombers. He packed up quickly, shaking the sand out of the blankets, but he took time to wash his face and hands with the anti-flea soap. He had to have a clean face. The water freshened him up. He was bursting to go to the toilet, but he held out till he got to the toilet by the bus station. There was a bus going up the coast to Blythe, and he found that he had plenty of loose change in his pockets. The driver and the conductor had got out to have a smoke under the clock tower, so he had time to get Don nicely settled on a tight lead before the conductor dumped his fag and came aboard. "Where to, young feller? Feller, me lad." "Single, all the way," Harry said vaguely. 4 pence. The man handed him a ticket and eyed his luggage. Been out for the day. On the beach, camping. By God, it's grand to be young. The man left him and went to tend the passengers upstairs. The bus started and swung out round the clock tower. Harry's heart gave a sudden lurch. He was glad to get away from the bombers, and from anyone who might recognize him. But this was home for the last time. There was Bertorelli's, where they'd come down on a Saturday night for ice cream, even in the depths of winter, and then back home by bus to hear Inspector Hornley's investigates on the radio. He was off the pastures new. He swallowed several times and took a firm grip on Don's collar. Awesome word for stealing. It is quite good for that. Let's see. I think we've got one chapter left in us. And then we might call it quits for the evening. Unless you guys, of course, insist on wanting to hear more. But for the time being, I'm going to read this chapter. And then we'll see how we feel. Because I'm running out of drink. Save your voice. Thanks, man. One more chapter and then we're done. Promise. This is as far as we go, Sonny Jim, said the conductor, unless you want to go back to Timoth. Oh, this is chapter 6, by the way. Where'd you live? God, adults got so suspicious so quickly. Harry had been dozing, but he had the sense to say, across the river. That was all he knew about Blythe. That it had a river. It was 10 miles from home, and he'd never been there in his life. You'll just catch the last ferry, said the conductor, and nodded his head instinctively in a certain direction. Harry grabbed his stuff, all of a shake, and set off in the direction the man had nodded. As he set off, he heard the conductor say to the driver, "Some folks have no sense, letting their burns wander around this time of night, with their air raids and all. I'll make you a cup if you want." I wish. Well, we'll see. Well, I'll be making myself a cup of tea after this, or I'll be having a beer. One of the two. It was late. The bus seemed to have taken forever. The sun was gone. It was getting dark. He began to hurry. There was no point in spending the night here. Blythe was bombed as often as Teignmouth. There were a lot of gaps in the streets of houses, and his mam said Blythe was full of roughs and drunks. He knew he was headed for the river all right, because of the towering dockside cranes. But the river was the roughest part of any town. And as he turned down the ferry my mouth is not working, I apologize. As he turned down the ferry landing, he met two roughs, men in dirty caps. He didn't like the way they stopped and watched him approach, the way they filled the whole footpath, blocking his way. "By, that's a grand dog you've got there. A grand expensive dog. Worth a pretty penny, that dog. Where did you find him? Is he lost?" "What you got in the case, laddie? Show us what you got in the case. We're policemen." "You're not policemen," said Harry with a desperate defiance. "You've got no uniforms." "Special constables we are." "Aye, very special." I have no idea what my accent's doing. I apologise. They laughed together in a nasty way. Plain clothes men. Aye, very plain clothes men. "Give us that attaché case, son." I reckon you've got something stolen concealed in there. If it's not stolen now, it soon will be. They they laughed, and one man reached for the case as Harry backed away against the wall. The next second, Don's lash ripped out of Harry's hand so hard he felt his palm had been burned. Don's black muzzle and huge teeth closed around the reaching hand. The man fell down, screaming in pain. "Joe, help me! Help me, for Christ's sake, help me!" Joe kicked the dog, kicked it in the hind leg. Don yipped, let go, and went for the second man's face. The sounds he was making were unbelievable, like a wild beast. Harry couldn't believe it was happening. The second man fell down. Then the next thing he knew was that the two men were on their feet and running, with Don in hot pursuit, barking like a fiend. He vanished around the corner, then came back after a minute. The same old friendly Don as ever, wagging his tail. Harry grabbed the trailing leash and ran for the ferry. He never knew how he gabbled out his request for a ticket to the man in the ticket booth. "Steady on, son," said the man, nodding at the ferry. "They won't go without you." Can't turn the page. As the gap of dark water widened between him and the men, Harry looked down at Don. Harry was shaking and trembling as much as himself. It was trembling so much himself, he could hardly hold the leash and the attaché case. But Don seemed quite calm, not even panting. As Harry watched, he nosed for a flea on his hairy flank, making a vigorous gnawing sound. It seemed all part of a day's work to him. The far side of the river was quieter. They were soon out of town and into the countryside, full of hawthorn hedges and rows of electricity pylons. He could hear, in the dark, the sea not far away. The sound of the waves soothed him. It was time to look for shelter for the night. Every time you got out of a mess, there was something else to worry about. They seemed to walk a long way with nothing but hedges. There seemed no way down to the sea, no hope of an upturned boat. Then something loomed up, as big as a house, shaped like a house, no light showing. Harry walked up to it and felt it in the dark. He felt a tight strand of rope and a lot of soft hay. A haystack. Dad had talked about sleeping on a haystack when he was a lad. Why not? There seemed to be a cave where someone had broken into the stack, lined with soft hay. It was enough. The stack was even thick enough to stop falling shrapnel. They sat side by side in the cave and shared the second to last packet of sausage and chips. They should have tasted awful, but neither of them could get enough. Mum had always said that hunger made the best sauce. Harry was too tired even to undo the blankets. He just pulled hay over the pair of them. Dad had always said you could sleep as snug as a bug in a rug in a haystack. It was warm, only it made your face prickle and your nose tickle. He heaved up the pack of blankets and made a pillow out of it. They slept. The dog growled once. Harry had no idea what time it was, but he heard the German bombers, far away, in the direction he had come from. Dreamily, he watched flashes that he knew must be bombs and guns over Timoth, but all far away. He turned over and slept again. He wakened warm and toast. The dog slept on, just ruffled in its dreams. Its paws moved softly in the hay, as if it was dreaming and it was running. Harry got up quietly so as not to disturb it, and covered it over with hay again. Seemed the kind of thing to do. Then he walked away from the haystack and looked towards the sea, and yawned and stretched and surveyed the lovely morning. The sky was blue, pale blue, from horizon to horizon again. The sea glittered in millions of points of light under where the sun was. There were white gulls circling over the beach. Their calls came faint to his ears. It felt blissy, like the first morning of a holiday on the farm in Gilsland, where they had gone every year, even after the war started. It was still cool and everything smelt good. He wondered what Mr. Gilby, the farmer at Gilsland, was doing at this moment. Would he have finished milking the cows? Harry always got up early and helped with the cows. The smell of them, all steamy and grassy. The smell of the warm steamed milk spurting into the shining bucket, and the slow swish of tails and the sound of munching. He and Mr. Gilby sang strange Methodist hymns slowly as he milked. When I survey the wondrous spurt cross. He liked Mr. Gilby. He liked farmers. He liked helping. So when he heard the distant sound of a tractor on the road, he turned to greet it. You always said good morning to the people you met in the country, even when you'd never seen them before. It was not like in town. The tractor approached, the farmer on it getting slowly bigger. He resolved from a series of coloured blobs, and Harry could see he looked quite like Mr. Gilby, with a long-sleeved, collarless shirt, and an open waistcoat over it, and a shapeless, bulging cap on his head. Harry waved timidly, because it could almost have been Mr. Gilby, though of course it couldn't be. He smiled as he waved. The tractor stopped. The farmer got down, leaving the engine running, stooped to pick up a large pair of the old leather gauntlets from where the driving pedals were, and walked up to Harry briskly. "Morning," said Harry. It was what you said in the country. He wondered what the farmer wanted. He couldn't be lost on his own farm. Maybe he wanted some help with the harvest. Mr. Gilby always did. Maybe he would pay, or at least give harvest meals of sweet cold tea and an apple pie. "You little sod," said the farmer. "I'll teach you to mess around with my haystack." He raised the hand with the gauntlet in it, and brought it slashing down on Harry's face. Harry fell down. He managed to yelp, "Please, mister." And then the farmer hit him with the gauntlet again. He tasted blood in his mouth. He held his arms up and protected his face. He rolled around on the ground, trying to get away from the blows. They went on and on and on the back of his head, on his shoulders, in his kidneys as he arched his back. His head spun. He couldn't think anymore. He was just pains. He yelled and yelled for mercy. Yeah, it would have been terrifying. And then it stopped, and somebody else was yelling. Harry looked around wildly. The farmer was standing, just standing. He had dropped the gauntlets and was clutching his big, hairy, bare arm. There was blood trickling down through his fingers, and Don was standing between him and Harry, crouching, back hunched, teeth bared in a snarl. Don growled, low and awful. The farmer looked insane. His small blue eyes were popping, his mouth was wide open, showing gaps in his teeth, and his cheeks were covered with whiskers where he hadn't shaved for a week. Then he gave a yell of rage. I'll settle your hash." "You murderous bastard!" he yelled at Don. He made for the tractor at great speed and picked something up from where he had picked up the gauntlets, something long and shiny, a double-barreled shotgun. Harry knew it was, because Mr. Gilby had carried one on his tractor at harvest time for potting rabbits that came out for the last of the corn. Harry leapt to his feet in terror. The farmer was going to shoot Don. He flung himself at the farmer. "Please, mister, no! No!" The farmer gave him one push and knocked him flat. As Harry got up, the farmer broke open the gun and put 2 fat red shells into it and turned towards Don. "Mister!" screamed Harry, running at him again, trying to get between the gun and Don. The farmer roughly pushed him away again, against the tractor seat. Harry put out his hand to save himself, and his hand closed around a long piece of wood, a fence post or something, that was lying on the floor of the tractor. Harry saw the farmer raise the gun and point it at Don, who was standing looking totally baffled. Harry's arms just moved of their own accord. He grabbed the fence post with both hands, raised it high above his head, and hit the farmer. He meant to hit him on the head, on his bulgy cap, but he missed and hit him on the small of the back. The farmer gave a terrible yell and fell down. The gun went off along the ground, raising an enormous cloud of dust and grass, cutting a long swathe through the stubble of the field. But Don was no longer anywhere near. Don was off and running, his ears down. There was a silence. Then the farmer slowly turned his head. "Christ, kid, I think you've broken me back." He didn't look insane now. He looked very pale and ill and feeble. The freckles stood out on his nose like spots of blood. He tried to raise himself on his hands, managed about 6 inches, and fell back. "Kid, help me," he said. He had little sandy eyelashes on the back, on thick white eyelids. Harry hated him. He was a disgusting object. He'd tried to kill Don, and now he was pleading like a baby. But he'd try to kill Don again, given half the chance. "Get lost!" shouted Harry. He turned away and grabbed his blankets and attaché case and ran off down the road. Don, thinking it was a game, came racing past him. "Kid!" shouted the farmer desperately. "Kid!" He shouted many times, but Harry just kept on running. Quarter of a mile further on, at the bend in the road, he looked back. The farmer had managed to haul himself to his feet against the tractor and was just standing there. At least his back wasn't broken. Harry ran on, reached a crossroads, and took the turning for New Biggin by the sea. His dad had told him about New Biggin. It was a fishing port. It didn't seem a place that a farmer would go. Soon after he crossed the river Waynesbeck, he left the road and headed down to the sea. He found what he was looking for, an old upturned boat on the beach, bleached grey with age and splitting at the seams. Making sure nobody was watching, he got the dog under it and tied him firmly to the thwart. By his lead. They lay there for the rest of the day, while Harry watched through the cracks for farmers and policemen. There wasn't a sign of either. Only one old man, beachcombing for sea coal, who went home with a full dripping sack. Then the sun had gone to set. It was the smell of real fish and chips wafting on the northeast breeze from New Biggin that finally lured Harry out after dark. He left the dog tied up and followed his nose till he found the chip shop. The shop was nearly empty, and the old lady behind the counter was so busy chatting to her crony that she served him without a glance. He got another bottle of Tizer, too. The fish was smashing. Then Newbiggin was a fishing village, where the boat still went out every day for rock salmon and rock turbot. The dog enjoyed his fish as well. On the edge of sleep, Harry thought how right it felt to be bedding down under a boat again, with the dog. It felt like the only way he had ever lived now. Other bits of him seemed to have dropped off during the day. He tried to think of Dad and Mam and Dulcie in the old days, but the pictures wouldn't come. But he didn't worry. They were buried somewhere deep and safe in his mind. He'd be able to think about them again someday. For now he had the sound of the sea, and a full belly, and warm blankets, and dawn. And for the first time, that was enough. Aww. Tizer was the bomb years ago. I bet it was. That's probably what the Germans used. No, I'm sorry. That was a dumb joke. Take the shotgun. He should have taken the shotgun. No, that would have been theft, and he really would have been in trouble then. But yeah. So thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed story time, but I think we're gonna call it quits for the evening there. We made some good headway. That was good. That was good headway. I'd say we're about a quarter of the way through there now. Sin hates Germans, it's official. Actually, the Germans I've met have been really lovely. Generally speaking. But yeah, we read like 30 odd pages or something. So I'm gonna leave you here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll be back next time. And I hope you enjoyed the story time stream. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Laffy Taffy. I apologize for my crappy reading, but sometimes I get excited when I read and I do it too fast and things happen with my mouth that just make it stop working. So I apologize for that. But for the time being, I'm gonna leave you guys here. I'll be back on Monday with... Oh! Thank you. Yes, I hope everyone has a good night as well. I'll be back on Monday with Final Fantasy VIII, where we continue to possibly have some more shared dreams. Gordon Bennett, that made me jump. It did. It made me jump too. Just not used to it. But anyway, I'll be back on Monday. I apologize for missing yesterday's stream, but I wasn't well at all. I was just experiencing many pains in the wrong places. But yes, I'm gonna... hang on, let me check a moment. I'm going to invite you guys to join a raid for Stardew Valley. This guy, Marcus, we've seen on the channel before. He's played Phasmophobia with us. So do join him. He's playing competitive Stardew Valley with his with another YouTuber and also his partner. So should be fun. Hopefully he's not quit out for the evening already. I will see you guys around. Marcus the boy indeed. Anyway, see you guys around. Bye bye.